Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the absolutely incredible 75-year story of India's economy. It's a real journey, from post-colonial scarcity all the way to becoming a global economic force. We're going to look at how it started, the one moment that changed everything, what's powering it today, and the huge challenge that's still ahead. So, if you want to understand India today, you've got to get your head around a few paradoxes. I mean, on one hand, you've got this $4 trillion economy. It's the fastest growing on the planet, a hub for IT, even shooting for the stars with its space tech. But on the other hand, you have a country where the average income is still pretty low, and that big manufacturing engine, well, it hasn't quite kicked into high gear yet. So, the big question is, how do you square that circle? How did India get to this point, and really, where is it all headed? All right, let's get into it. Our story really kicks off back in 1947. India finally gets its independence, which is amazing, but it inherits an economy that's been completely hollowed out, just devastated. And to give you some context here, before colonial rule, India was an absolute economic powerhouse. We're talking nearly a quarter of the world's entire GDP. But by 1947, that share had just crashed to less than 4%. So the new government's response was to wall everything off, control it from the top down, and try to build everything from scratch by itself. And this led to a system that people started calling the license Raj. And really, it was just this giant, tangled web of red tape. The government basically had to give you permission for everything. You want to start a business? You need a license. You want to import a new machine for that business? You need a license. You want to produce more goods than you were originally allowed? Yep, you guessed it, you need another license. And the result of all this? Well, the economy just crawled along. For decades, growth was stuck at a frustrating 3.5% a year. It was so slow, people mockingly called it the Hindu rate of growth. It really makes you think, doesn't it? How do you find that perfect balance between smart regulation and just letting businesses run? So by the early 90s, all that slow growth had created this pressure cooker. Something had to give. And it did. The whole system was pushed right to the edge of a total financial meltdown. And then, in 1991, the crisis hit hard. India ran out of foreign currency. I mean, it had enough money to pay for just 2 weeks of essential imports. It got so bad that, in what was seen as a moment of national humiliation, they had to physically fly the country's gold reserves to London just to get an emergency loan. And that loan from the IMF, it came with some huge strings attached. India had to open its economy and finally tear down the license Raj. You know what? It worked. The change was almost immediate. The economy just took off. Entrepreneurs were unleashed. And by the mid-2000s, India was averaging an incredible 8.8% growth a year. The economy wasn't crawling anymore, it was sprinting. Okay, so that sprint really set the stage for what's happening right now. But this time, the growth engine isn't just about factories. It's something totally new, built on a digital foundation that's changing everything. At the very heart of India's economic story today is something called digital public infrastructure, or DPI. The simplest way to think about it is like digital public utilities. The government built a few core things, like a universal ID for everyone and an instant payment network, and then just made them available for anyone to use and build on top of. And the philosophy here is just so powerful. It's like the government's job isn't to build every single digital store or app. Its job is to pave the digital roads. And that's exactly what systems like the Aadhaar ID and the UPI payments network are. They are the roads, and now private innovation is just driving like crazy all over them. And the results have been absolutely explosive. Just look at UPI, that instant payment system. In just a few short years, it went from a few hundred million transactions a month to nearly 20 billion. It has completely rewired how over 1 billion people buy and sell things. It's so successful, it leaves you with a really interesting question. What exactly is the secret sauce here? Why has this model worked so incredibly well in India? And this amazing digital foundation is now acting like a launch pad for all these other exciting sectors. You see it in electronics, where India is becoming a huge player in assembling smartphones, and you really see it in space. The government opened the sector up to private companies just a few years ago, and now there are over 200 startups building everything from tiny satellites to full-blown rockets. But all this incredible progress, all this growth, it brings us right to the fundamental challenge that's going to define India's next decade. It's the quest to become not just a big economy, but a truly prosperous one for everyone. And this is where we have to talk about the huge difference between economic size and broad prosperity.
Okay, think of the economy like a giant ship. By total size, its GDP, India's ship is already one of the biggest in the entire world. But prosperity, that's not just about how big the ship is. It's about making sure every single passenger on board has a well-stocked lifeboat. And that is a much, much harder journey.
And when you look at the numbers, the gap is pretty stark. While India's total economic pie is massive, the average slice per person is still just a fraction of what you'd see in a country like China. Closing that gap, that's the number one challenge right now. A big reason for that gap is the actual shape of the economy. See, India's growth leapfrogged a step. It was led by the services sector. Think IT, finance. That's really different from the manufacturing-led path that China took. And the problem is that services just don't create the same massive number of jobs that factories do for a young, growing population. And so, turning that impressive economic size into real prosperity for everybody means tackling these massive hurdles head on. We're talking about creating millions of quality jobs, closing the gap between what kids learn in school and what companies actually need, and navigating all the complexities of building infrastructure in a massive, vibrant democracy.
And that leaves us with the one big question that's going to define India's future. The country has the largest youth population in the world, an incredible demographic gift. But whether that gift turns India into a true superpower, well, it all comes down to the answer to this one thing. Will this massive generation be India's greatest asset or its biggest challenge?